My daughter pointed at me with a dish towel in her hand as if it were a weapon. You either do what Brandon asks or get out of this house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask her to repeat herself. I simply looked at her. Standing in the kitchen I had renovated with my own hands inside the house I'd paid for with 42 years of my life. Then I turned to the coat rack, took my jacket, and walked out. That was the moment everything changed. Not with an argument, but with a door clicking shut behind me. Before we continue, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. You won't believe what happened next. The grocery bags were cutting into my palms by the time I reached the entryway. The keys were still warm from the ignition. The soft Montana spring light filtered through the windows, casting golden strips across the floorboards Martha and I had refinished with our own hands back in '03. Usually light like that would have made me smile, but that day it only made the dust easier to see. Brandon was already sprawled across my recliner, the one Martha gave me before the cancer came. His socked feet were kicked up like he owned the place remote, balanced on his stomach, and one of my Coronas hanging from his fingers. "Hey, Walt," he mumbled, eyes still glued to the game, "grab me another one while you're up." I set the grocery bags on the counter. 2 gallons of milk, a loaf of rye and eggs. I'd spent the last of my Social Security check on things for the house they lived in, the house I paid for. And yet Brandon's voice, bored, casual, entitled, cut through the air like a dull knife. "Corona, not that cheap stuff you drink." I didn't say anything at first, just stood there facing the refrigerator. He hadn't even looked at me, just assumed I'd obey. "Brandon," I said, keeping my voice steady. I just walked in. "Let me put these away first." He didn't move. "What's the big deal?" "You're already standing. I'm comfortable. Don't make this a thing." That's when Natalie walked in from the hallway, her blonde hair pulled back in that hurried ponytail she always wore when she didn't want to deal with things. "What's going on?" she asked, looking between us. "Your dad's being difficult," Brandon said, still not looking at me. "I asked for a beer, and now it's a federal case." Natalie gave me a look I hadn't seen since she was 16. Disappointed, a little embarrassed. "Dad, just get him the beer. It's not worth the fight." Brandon stood up slowly then. Taller than me, broader too, but not smarter, not wiser. "Here's how it's gonna work, Walt," he said, stepping close enough that I could smell the hops on his breath. "You live here, you contribute. When I ask you for something, you don't question it. No attitude, no backtalk. Just do it." That's when Natalie joined him. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her voice was calm, cold. "Dad, you need to decide. Either you respect Brandon or you find somewhere else to live." That was the moment, the quiet crossing of a line. I looked at them both, my daughter and the man she married. I searched her face for the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, the one who used to braid dandelions into crowns and call me her hero. She wasn't there. "All right," I said. Brandon smirked. "Good. Now I'll pack," I interrupted. He blinked. Natalie's jaw dropped slightly. They thought I'd do what I always did. Shrug, mumble back down. But not this time. I turned and walked toward my bedroom. Behind me, the grocery bags sat untouched on the counter. I didn't hear a word from them as I rolled my suitcase from the closet. The green one. The one Martha and I took on our trip to Yellowstone back when we still believed we had time. I packed slowly, deliberate. 3 shirts, 1 sweater, 2 pairs of slacks, the shaving kit I'd had since Vietnam, my reading glasses, my notebook, the photo of Martha wrapped gently in one of my old undershirts. It wasn't about grabbing everything, it was about reclaiming something. Outside the door I could hear them whispering. The urgency in their voices rises with every passing minute, but I didn't stop. My hands moved calmly, folding the same way I'd folded Natalie's baby clothes decades ago. And then I wheeled the suitcase down the hallway. Brandon had returned to the recliner. Natalie was now by the kitchen, arms crossed, trying to look composed. No one stopped me. No one said goodbye. The Buick started on the first turn of the key. I didn't check the window to see if they were watching. I didn't look back. The 27-minute drive to Pine Haven was quiet, just me and the hum of the tires. I passed the old church where I'd once walked Natalie down the aisle. I passed the high school football field where Brandon used to yell at referees like it was his career. The town hadn't changed, but I had. When I pulled into the gravel lot of Pine Haven Motel, it felt more permanent than it should have. The neon sign flickered, the siding was chipped, but the woman behind the desk didn't ask questions. Room 4, first floor, non-smoking, paid in cash. The room was small but clean. A bed, a chair, a TV I wouldn't turn on. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my notebook. I flipped to the pages that mattered. Natalie's tuition $38,000, her wedding $24,000, the down payment on the house $78,000, mortgage assistance, groceries, utilities, insurance. I stopped adding after $200,000 because what I needed now wasn't math, it was clarity. They hadn't kicked me out. I'd allowed myself to stay too long. I wasn't punished. I was waking up. I opened my laptop and logged into my online banking. I stared at the screen for a while, then I clicked on the tab labeled Recurring Payments, found the mortgage, found the insurance, found the grocery cards. The cursor blinked at me waiting. The first click canceled the mortgage. The second ended the car insurance. By the time I closed the browser, I felt something I hadn't felt in years weightlifting. Not revenge, not even satisfaction, just the beginning of something I thought I'd lost. Self-respect. I leaned back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. They didn't know what I had just done. Not yet, but they would. And when they did, I wouldn't be coming back. The motel room was quiet that morning. Not peaceful, just quiet. And there's a difference. Peaceful is what you feel when the world outside you has softened. Quiet is what's left when you finally silence the noise you spent years pretending you didn't hear. I sat at the little desk by the window, coffee cooling in a foam cup, my notebook open beside me. The pages were worn corners folded, the spine soft like it had been opened 1,000 times because it had. That notebook had tracked every dollar I spent keeping someone else's life afloat, and today it would track how I took it all back. I turned to the inside cover. A message from Natalie. 16 years old, blue ink in loopy handwriting. Thanks for believing in me, Dad. I'll make you proud. She had for a while. I looked at that note longer than I meant to. Then I turned the page, took a sip of lukewarm coffee, and made my first call. First Montana Bank. Hold Music, a hollow instrumental version of Home on the Range. Fitting, I thought. I'd had a range once, a family, a home. Now I had a room with thin walls and a blinking desk lamp. Thank you for calling First Montana. This is Daniel. How can I help you? Yes, Daniel. I need to cancel the automatic mortgage payment for 1931 Jasper Ridge Lane, account ending in 4887. There was a short pause. Typing. The kind of pause that always follows a request that sounds too calm to be casual. Sir, I see that payment's been active for 27 months. Are you sure you want to discontinue it? Completely. May I ask the reason? The homeowners no longer qualify for my assistance. Silence again, shorter this time. Then Daniel said, Understood, Mr. Granger. That will be effective immediately. He read me the confirmation number. I wrote it down. $246 a month, going back into my account. I didn't smile. I didn't sigh. I just moved on to the next item. Second call, Summit Insurance. Brandon had added both his Silverado and Natalie's Honda to my policy 3 years ago, said it was temporary. Everything with Brandon was temporary except his expectations. Hello, this is Karen with Summit Auto. How can I assist you? Yes, Karen. I need to remove 2 vehicles from my policy. A 2017 Chevy Silverado and a 2014 Honda Accord. They're no longer part of my household. She asked for the VINs. I had them. Of course I did. I'd paid the bills every month. I'd watched Brandon's truck get new tires while I drove on old ones. I'd paid $282.77 per month to insure 2 vehicles I never touched. Karen confirmed the removal. Said they'd have 10 days to secure new coverage. I made another note in the notebook. Auto insurance terminated. Confirmation number recorded. Then came the cards. Natalie had been an authorized user on 3 of my credit cards. Visa, MasterCard, Costco. It started during her honeymoon, just for emergencies. 5 years of shoes, groceries, electronics, cosmetics, spa visits, all in my name. I'd told myself it was love, that helping her was part of being a good father. But helping and enabling aren't the same thing. I see that now. Visa was polite, efficient. Removing an authorized user won't affect the existing balance, Mr. Granger, the agent explained. but she won't be able to make new purchases. That's exactly what I want. I repeated the process with the other two, each time the same quiet relief, like untying knots that had been cinched too tightly for too long. By noon, I'd canceled over $2,000 in monthly drain. I printed every confirmation, organized them into folders, labeled and stacked, one for the mortgage, one for insurance, one for credit. This wasn't vengeance. It was record-keeping. Clean, legal, irrefutable. Then I sent an email to my attorney. Subject line, amendment request. Richard, please update my estate file. Natalie and Brandon are no longer in my residence. Financial support has ended. Let's schedule a review of the will. I want everything ironclad. Send. I stared out the window for a moment. The view was nothing special. Just a parking lot, a gas station, a few birds fighting over a fast food wrapper. But the air felt different, like I could breathe again. At 1:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. Hey, Dad, I think something's wrong with the mortgage. Can you check? I didn't answer. Then a call from Brandon, straight to voicemail. I listened to their messages in order one by one, like chapters in a book I already knew the ending to. First, confusion. Dad, the bank said the mortgage bounced. That can't be right? Second, frustration. Walter, my truck insurance lapsed. I had a meeting today. What the hell? Third, fear. The bank's demanding full payment by Friday or they'll start foreclosure. Can you please call me? Fourth, desperation. Dad, did you cancel the cards too? I just got declined at the store. Fifth, anger. This is sabotage. You're punishing us over a stupid argument. Sixth, pleading. Dad, I didn't mean it. We didn't mean it. Can we talk? I saved every message, then transferred them all to a USB drive, labeled it voicemails, March 2025. I wasn't planning a court case, but I believed in documentation. If they ever tried to paint me as unstable or worse, I wanted the truth preserved. Later that afternoon, I walked down Main Street. The hardware store was still there. So was the bakery where Martha used to buy cinnamon rolls every Sunday. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I wasn't just a father anymore, not a sponsor, not a backup plan. I was a man walking forward for the first time in years. When I returned to the motel, I opened my laptop again, searched Montana property deed transfer. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney back. Richard, I want to donate the house. There was a pause on the other end. Permanently, yes, to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative. He didn't respond at first. Then he said, that's a big move. No, Richard, it's a clean one. I want the house to go to people who understand sacrifice, not people who think it's owed to them. By the time I hung up, the first cracks were already showing in their lives, and I'd done it all with a keyboard, a phone, and a notebook. No yelling, no fights, no slammed doors, just numbers, just facts, just freedom. At 6:12 p.m., my phone rang again. I didn't answer, but I smiled. They had no idea how much more was coming. And the best part, everything I'd done was already done. By Wednesday, my phone had collected 22 missed calls. I let every one of them ring, no rush. People reveal themselves better in panic than in calm, and I wanted to hear exactly how deep their understanding ran, if it ran at all. That morning, I sat at the motel's wooden desk with the USB drive in one hand and my coffee in the other, replaying the voicemails in order. The early ones had an almost amused tone, as if this was all a misunderstanding. Natalie's voice still light. Hey, Dad. Not sure what happened with the mortgage payment, but the bank left a weird message. Can you check on it? Brandon followed a few hours later, clipped, distracted Walter. Insurance is down on the truck. I've got meetings this week. Fix it. By the sixth message, something shifted. Natalie's voice cracked around the edges, a tremble underneath her usually practiced calm. They're saying if the full payment isn't in by Friday, they'll start foreclosure proceedings. I don't understand. Why would they say that? Her voice wasn't angry yet, just confused. A daughter trying to solve a puzzle with one piece missing the piece she'd pushed out of the house 3 nights ago. Brandon's tone was different. Sharper. More entitled. Clark, I've got people asking why I don't have valid coverage. It's embarrassing. You need to handle this. Today. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't even bother pretending this was a partnership. He expected results. Always had. By the 9th voicemail, the tone had changed completely. Natalie was crying. Please call me. We can figure this out. We didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what's happening. Then a pause, then silence. Her voice broke as she whispered, I think I messed up. It should have hit me harder than it did. But something in the way she said it, like a child afraid of consequences, not a woman reckoning with them, left me still. I didn't delete the messages. I archived them. Organized. Time-stamped. I believed in preserving evidence even when forgiveness was on the table, if forgiveness ever made it there. By Friday, Brandon was no longer asking. He was shouting, You selfish old bastard, you're punishing us because you didn't get your way. Grow up. You want to be alone. Fine. Stay in that dump and rot. That one I listened to twice. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed what I'd long suspected. The only reason Brandon had ever tolerated me was because I kept the lights on. Around noon, there was a knock on my motel door. I didn't flinch. Through the peephole, I saw them both. Natalie was in a wrinkled sweater, eyes swollen. Brandon was in his usual jacket, looking like he hadn't slept. I opened the door just wide enough to be polite. Dad. Natalie said, her voice small. We need to talk. I didn't invite them in. I didn't smile. I just waited. Brandon took a step forward. About the mortgage, the insurance, all of it. You can't just stop paying. That's our house. No, I said quietly. It's my house. My name is on the deed. I signed the loan. You were guests. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. You can't mean that. You gave me an ultimatum, I replied. Obey Brandon or leave. I chose to leave. Now you're shocked I did exactly what you told me to do. Brandon tried to push past civility. His voice rose. This isn't about a beer. This is your family, your daughter. You're tearing it all apart. I kept my voice calm. I didn't raise my voice in that kitchen. I didn't throw anyone out. But you asked me to choose. So I did. Now you live with that. He stepped closer, his voice sharper. You think you're gonna scare me with some banking tricks? You're playing games with people's lives. I raised an eyebrow. Isn't that what you did when you tried to forge ownership papers for a home equity loan? He froze. Natalie blinked. What? I held his gaze. You told the bank it was your property, tried to pull a $50,000 equity line, used fake documentation. Bob Harrison flagged it. Brandon's jaw tightened. You're lying. No, Brandon. I'm not. And you're not good enough at lying to make it stick. Natalie turned to him shocked. Is that true? He said nothing. I let the silence do its work. Then I added, I've already spoken to a lawyer. I've already filed an eviction notice. 30 days. After that, the sheriff's notice. No more informal generosity. No more invisible handouts. Natalie's voice cracked. Dad, please, there's more going on than you realize. I'm sure there is, I said. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. She hesitated. I'm pregnant. I stood still. I let that hang in the air. Then I said, Congratulations. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm serious. The doctor says the stress could affect the baby. We need things to settle. You need money, I corrected gently. And you think dangling a potential grandchild will change that. But Natalie, I spent $60,000 putting you through college, another $25,000 on your wedding, $78,000 for your down payment. For 5 years I paid your mortgage, your groceries, your insurance. I gave you everything I had. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. I didn't know. Yes, you did. You just didn't ask how much it cost me. Brandon grabbed her arm. Let's go. This is pointless. I said nothing as they left, watched them walk across the parking lot like two people tethered together by shared guilt. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt like I'd finally stopped lying to myself. That night I walked down Main Street to the diner Martha used to love. Same red booths, same scent of burnt bacon and cheap coffee. I took the corner seat near the window, ordered nothing but tea. A few minutes later, Bob Harrison walked in. Saw me, walked straight over. Clark, he said. Mind if I sit, be my guest. He didn't sugarcoat it. Brandon came back to the bank last week, asked about adverse possession. I nodded. I figured. He was asking how long someone had to occupy a property to claim ownership. Said he was just curious. But the timing, it wasn't subtle. 5 years right, Bob nodded. But it has to be hostile. No permission, no rent. He doesn't qualify. He thought he could outweight me. He was wrong. I paid for my tea, walked back to the motel, opened my laptop, created a folder, Brandon Wells. Attempts. Inside it I placed screenshots, emails, voicemail transcriptions. The pattern was building. Not just laziness, not just entitlement. Fraud. Deliberate. Calculated. Desperate. And desperation makes people sloppy. By the next morning I'd filed for a restraining order, not because I was scared, but because I knew what men like Brandon do when they realize the money's gone. Steve, the motel manager, knocked on my door just after breakfast. "Mr. Granger," he said, "that guy came by last night, stood out front, didn't say much, just paced, muttered, then drove off. Did the cameras catch him?" "Sure did. You want a copy?" "Please." I forwarded the video to my attorney and the officer handling my case. That same afternoon I received confirmation. The restraining order was signed. Brandon Wells was legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. I forwarded the order to the sheriff. Natalie called later that day. I answered. "Dad, Brandon's losing it. The creditors are calling. They know he doesn't own the house. They're threatening to garnish his wages." "They should," I said. "He borrowed. He lied. He made that bed. What am I supposed to do?" "You have choices, Natalie, same as I did. You can face what's true, or keep defending what's broken." She was quiet, then barely above a whisper. "He's planning to leave town," I figured. "And the house, already in transfer. It's going to the Montana Veterans Housing Initiative." Silence. Then, "You gave it away. I gave it to people who know what sacrifice means." She didn't cry. She just said, "You're not the same." "No," I replied. "I'm finally me again." That evening I watched through the motel window as the sky turned orange over the rooftops. Brandon was unraveling. Natalie was waking up. And me, I was ready for whatever came next. Because now I wasn't reacting. I was writing the ending. It started small. A glance too long at the gas station. A subtle shift in the way the pharmacist said, "Have a good day," with a little too much emphasis. I'd lived in this town for nearly 40 years, long enough to understand its language of silence. People here don't confront, they observe, and they remember. The cashier at Piggly Wiggly no longer asked if Natalie was coming by to help me shop. The mailman, Carl, slowed his steps by my motel door as if wanting to say something but unsure how to begin. I didn't offer him anything, I just nodded. That was enough. 3 days after Brandon's last outburst, I went to the post office to redirect some final paperwork. Ms. Doreen, who had handled mail here longer than most people in town had been alive, leaned across the counter and asked in that sweet but pointed tone of hers, "Walter, why aren't you at the house these days? Everything okay out there on Maple?" I met her gaze evenly. "I'm staying somewhere quieter for now." She blinked. Just once. Then she nodded slowly, like someone who'd just confirmed a hunch she'd been chewing on for days. "Well," she said, "some quiet's earned, some's forced. But either way, I hope you find what fits." I thanked her. Walked out into the thick summer air, the kind that made every step feel like a conversation you didn't want to finish. That evening I went to the hardware store. No reason, just needed nails. Maybe I needed to be around shelves again, wood, metal, concrete things that stayed where you put them. George, the owner, saw me from across the aisle and walked over without a word. He handed me a receipt before I even made it to the counter. "On the house," he said. I looked down. 3 boxes of nails, some sandpaper, and a small container of wood stain. I didn't ask for this. "No," he replied. "But I've seen things. And I figure if a man's rebuilding something, the least we can do is make sure he doesn't have to start from scratch." I left the store with more weight in my chest than in my hands. It wasn't pity. Pity is hollow. This was something else. Recognition, maybe. Quiet justice. By the weekend, I began walking past my old neighborhood again. Not to spy, not to gloat. Just to see. The The lawn had grown high, trash cans were overflowing, the porch light was still out. Brandon had never figured out how to replace the sensor. And Natalie's car hadn't moved in days. No kids playing out front, no music through the window, just a house pretending to be a home. I stood across the street for a moment too long. Mrs. Carter, who used to bring us cookies every 4th of July, called from her porch. "Walter." I turned. "You need a ride anywhere?" she asked, already knowing the answer. I shook my head. She nodded. But as I walked away, I heard her mutter loud enough for the wind to carry, "You were too good to them." The words stuck. Later that day, I found a letter slid under my motel door. No name, no address, just 5 words written in shaky ink. "We see more than you think." There was a $20 bill folded inside. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't care. What mattered was, this truth doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. The next morning I got coffee at Joni's Diner. It used to be our Sunday spot, mine and Martha's. Natalie would join sometimes. We'd sit by the window splitting hash browns and memories. This time I sat alone, but not unnoticed. Joni herself came over, poured my cup without asking. She looked at me for a beat longer than usual. She said, "You stormed out," Joni said quietly. She told people that I asked. Joni's lips pressed thin. "Only once, loud enough, at the salon, but it didn't land the way she hoped." I nodded. "People choose their truths carefully. Not when they've been served coffee here for 30 years, they don't," Joni said. Then she leaned in, almost conspiratorial. "We all remember the man who paid for the Christmas lights downtown when the city budget ran dry, who shoveled old Mrs. Henson's driveway after her hip surgery. People don't forget who built the house just to give it away." I thanked her, ate slowly. That day I didn't feel invisible. That evening Natalie called. I answered after the 4th ring. "Dad," she said, "they're cutting power to the house tomorrow." "I'm aware," I replied. I don't know what to do anymore." "You do," I said. "You just don't want to." She hesitated. Can I come see you?" I paused. "Yes, but not here. Meet me at Martha's bench." It was the old wooden bench near the town square, the one I had built after she passed. Quiet spot, good view of the trees. I waited 15 minutes. Natalie arrived wearing the same gray cardigan she'd had on the night I left. Her face looked different now, hollow, less proud. She sat slowly. "I told people you were being dramatic," she said, "that you just wanted attention, that you were punishing me." I said nothing, but no one believed me. Not really. They knew you, and the more I tried to justify, the worse it sounded. I still said nothing. "I wanted you to feel sorry, but you didn't even flinch." "That's because I wasn't trying to win Natalie," I finally said. "I was trying to stop losing." She looked down. "People are talking. Brandon lost his job. They said the company couldn't trust someone with that kind of financial mess. I'm not surprised. He blames you. I'm not surprised about that either." She swallowed hard. "He might leave. The baby's due in 6 months." I looked at her. "You'll be okay. You just have to decide whose shadow you want to live in, his or your own." We sat there in silence for a long time. The town buzzed in the distance. Lawnmowers, wind chimes, the sound of a life still going on. When she finally stood, she said one thing. "I miss Mom. I do too." Then she left. The next day I got a letter from the local VFW. They'd heard I was donating the house to the Veterans Housing Program. They wanted to honor me at their monthly meeting. I declined the ceremony, but I agreed to attend. When I showed up, 3 men I hadn't seen in years stood to shake my hand. Not because I gave them a house, but because I gave up what I could no longer keep. That night I stood at the edge of town watching the house from a hilltop. The porch light was still broken, but I no longer needed it to shine. The letter arrived in a cream envelope with no return address, just my name typed in block font. Walter D. Wells. There was a certain weight to paper like that. It didn't flutter. It settled. I took it inside the motel, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and opened it under the yellow light of the kitchenette. The header was from Cartwright Myers and Stone, an old law firm 2 towns over. I hadn't heard from them in years, not since Martha passed. They were the ones who'd handled the original property transfer when I moved the deed into Natalie's name. But this wasn't just a courtesy letter. It was a reminder. Inside was a transcript. A notarized copy of a conversation recorded apparently without Brandon's knowledge between him and a financial consultant. I read the words twice before folding the pages neatly and setting them down. The consultant had warned him more than once that trying to leverage the property against new lines of credit without proof of independent income was risky. Brandon had brushed it off. "It's my wife's name on the deed," he'd said, "and her dad won't fight us. He's soft, old school, one of those I'll just pay the bill types." I sat very still. It's strange how betrayal always comes in familiar fonts. I didn't feel rage, not even disappointment, just clarity. Brandon hadn't just taken advantage of Natalie's trust. He'd wagered on my silence. That was his miscalculation. I wasn't soft. I was waiting. I picked up the phone and called the number at the bottom of the letter. A woman answered, crisp and direct. "Cartwright, Myers & Stone. This is Delilah." I introduced myself, thanked her for the letter, and asked for Mr. Myers. She paused. "He asked that I put you through directly if you called." The line clicked. Then another voice, low and measured, came on. "Mr. Wells, we've been watching this unfold from a distance, and I believe the time has come to discuss what you're owed not just morally but legally." We spoke for 40 minutes. He confirmed what I had already suspected. Brandon had tried to take out a second mortgage on the house using forged income statements. The loan was denied, but the application remained on file enough to trigger an investigation if I wished. More importantly, Mr. Myers pointed out a clause I'd almost forgotten, a reversionary interest clause I had quietly insisted be included when the house was transferred. A safety net. At the time, it had seemed unnecessary. Now it was gold. In essence, the clause stated that if the property were ever used for non-residential purposes, or if the named occupant vacated for more than 60 days without prior consent from the grantor me, it would revert to my ownership pending written request and review by a designated legal counsel. Brandon hadn't read the fine print. Natalie had signed without question, and I, the old-school man he mocked, had anticipated this day years in advance. Mr. Myers offered to begin the reversion process quietly. "We won't need a court," he said, "not unless they push back. But given the current mess on Brandon's record, I suspect he'll be too busy salvaging what's left of his credit." I agreed, not out of vengeance, but because the house wasn't just brick and lumber. It was Martha's voice in every corner, the fireplace I built with my own hands, the oak tree under which Natalie took her first steps. If they couldn't respect that, they wouldn't keep it. 2 weeks passed. During that time, I made myself scarce. I spent afternoons at the library combing through old photo albums I had scanned into my cloud drive. I made backup copies of documents, receipts, and financial statements. I labeled folders with care utilities, canceled bank accounts, closed insurance, transferred. Every label was a stitch in the wound they thought they'd left open. But I was no longer bleeding. I was documenting. Then one morning I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered. It was Natalie. Her voice shook slightly. "Dad, did you send some kind of letter to the bank?" "No," I said truthfully. "I sent it to a lawyer. He sent it to the county." Silence. Then, "They say the title's in dispute, that we might lose the house." I'd say that's accurate. "You didn't warn me." "I did," I replied, "just not with words." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Brandon left." I didn't answer. "He packed up yesterday. Said I'd ruined everything." "No," I said. "He ruined his reflection. You just finally looked in the mirror." She hung up. I didn't call back. Later that week, I met with Mr. Myers in person. He wore a simple gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked older than both of us. "We filed the reversion," he said, "and the county's office confirmed the clause is valid. The title will revert to you within 10 business days pending no formal challenge. And if they challenge, they'll lose," he said without blinking. "The chain of ownership is airtight, and I've taken the liberty of preparing a rental agreement should you wish to let Natalie stay under new terms." I looked at the paper. It was simple, clear, fair, and non-negotiable. "I won't charge her rent," I said. "But I won't give her keys either. If she wants to live there, she can re-earn the right." He nodded. "Understood." On the way out of the office, I passed a young man sitting in the waiting area. His eyes followed me as I walked past. He didn't speak, but the look in his eyes was one I'd seen before, young, entitled, certain the world owed him something. I wondered for a moment if he was someone else's Brandon. Then I walked on. By the time I returned to the motel, the sky had turned the color of polished steel. Rain threatened but never arrived. I sat by the window sipping coffee gone cold and watched the headlights pass. I wasn't angry. I wasn't smug. I was settled. There's a kind of peace that comes not from justice, but from the slow, methodical undoing of a lie. Brick by brick, form by form, clause by clause. At 8:13 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Natalie. It read, "He's gone. The lights are off. I'm scared." I didn't reply, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons need to echo in the silence before they're understood. I stared out the window a moment longer. Then I picked up the copy of the reversion clause and slipped it back into the envelope. On the front, I wrote in clean block letters, "For your records," and I addressed it to her name. Only hers, not his. There's a bench outside the old library on Elm and 3rd, painted forest green, though time and sun have stripped most of the color. Its legs are uneven. One corner always wobbles just slightly when you sit. I used to hate that. I used to think if the city just fixed this one thing, maybe the world would feel a little more orderly. But now I sit on that wobble on purpose. I've learned that imbalance is what teaches you to stay upright. That morning I sat there with a paper bag on my lap, 2 apple turnovers still warm from the corner bakery. They only bake them on Thursdays, and Martha used to say the ones with the uneven edges always had the best filling. She liked imperfect things. I never understood why until now. Natalie used to meet me here after school when she was 10. She'd come running from St. Jude's across the street, backpack bouncing, eyes too big for her face. Martha would pack 2 snacks, one healthy, one not. Natalie always chose the non-healthy one first, then offered me the carrot sticks as if that somehow evened things out. I used to think those moments would last forever, that if you did everything right, paid the bills, stayed faithful, worked hard, love would stay where you left it. I was wrong. The truth is, love drifts, like fog. It doesn't ask permission, and if you don't tether it with truth, it finds other harbors. I think Natalie stopped seeing me as her father the day I let too much silence take over. Not malice, not distance, just silence. I stopped telling her how the mortgage worked. I stopped explaining why I drove an old truck instead of leasing a new one. I thought I was protecting her from the weight. But weightlessness can be dangerous too, especially when the first man to promise her something shinier makes it sound like safety. A few kids biked past the bench laughing too loudly, one of them dropping a plastic bottle that rolled under a bush. None of them stopped to pick it up. That's the world now. No pause, no memory, just forward. But me, I stayed still. I took out 1 turnover and bit into it slowly. The cinnamon hit the back of my throat like a memory. I don't know why, but in that moment I imagined Martha sitting beside me. Not ghostly, not spectral, just present. Her cardigan sleeves rolled up the way she always did when she was ready to argue. "She's not cruel," I imagined her saying. "She's just borrowed too much from someone who is." And I knew she meant Brandon. I've learned not to respond to the memory of Martha like she's there. That's a slippery slope, and grief knows how to blur lines. But I do talk back in my head sometimes. I told her right then that the house was coming back to me, that the clause worked, that Brandon had left, that Natalie was alone. I waited for Martha's voice to say something triumphant. But it didn't. It said simply, "Then go see her." I shook my head. "Not yet." I muttered to no one. And I didn't. Instead, I went to the church records office. I don't know what drew me there, but it felt like a thread I had to follow. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and old ink. The receptionist was kind, soft-spoken. I asked if they still had the archive from the St. Jude's Fathers and Daughters fundraiser in 2003. She blinked surprised, then nodded. "We don't get many requests that specific." She returned with a box. Inside were photos, black and white Polaroids and faded Kodak prints. And there it was, Natalie in a white dress with a crooked bow standing between me and Martha, my hand on her shoulder, her smile crooked like she'd lost a baby tooth the day before. I stared at that photo for longer than I should have, not because I missed it, but because I finally realized what it meant. Back then I was present, yes, but not emotionally visible. I posed, I provided, I protected. But I didn't narrate my love. I didn't tell Natalie when I was afraid or tired or unsure, and so she learned strength was silence, and now she was drowning in it. I left the church office with the photo tucked into my jacket. I didn't call her, not yet. But I did drive past the house. My house. The windows were dark. The porch light was off. Her car was still in the driveway, but there was no movement behind the curtains. I sat across the street, engine off, for what must have been 20 minutes. The mailbox still had the same dent I'd accidentally made backing out too fast the day we moved in. The tulips she and Martha planted had long since died, replaced by cheap gravel and LED path lights. Brandon's touch, efficient, lifeless. I didn't get out of the truck. I didn't knock. I just watched. And thought. About the line between giving and disappearing. About the line between dignity and pride. About what Martha would have done. She wouldn't have barged in. But she wouldn't have driven away either. She would have waited. So that's what I did. That night at the motel, I finally opened the envelope I'd been avoiding. The one labeled Martha. Safe deposit backup. Inside were her handwritten notes, household budgets, birthday plans, even a letter, addressed to me, no date, just in case I'm gone and you need to remember. I read it slowly. Her handwriting curved like a river full of loops and stubborn angles. She wrote, "Walter, you don't need to fix everything. You just need to stay seen. Don't disappear in your sense of duty. Natalie will need more than money. She'll need your honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable, even when she hates you for it. That's how love stays tethered." I folded the letter, and I cried. Not loudly. Just enough to feel like something inside had been cracked open for repair. The next morning I returned to the bench outside the library. The same bench. I brought 2 turnovers again. Not out of ritual, but readiness. And this time I didn't sit alone. A soft voice spoke from behind. "Is that seat taken?" I didn't turn. Just nodded. "No. It's yours." Natalie sat down slowly. Her face was pale, eyes hollow as if she hadn't slept. She looked older than 32. Older than she should have. She didn't speak. Neither did I. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the silence of judgment. It was the silence of rebuilding. Finally, she spoke. "I found your letter, the clause, the lawyer stuff, all of it." I nodded. "I should have known. You always plan 5 steps." "No," I said. "Just one. I plan to outlive the lie." She looked at me, eyes glassy. "I don't know who I am without him." I handed her a turnover. "Then it's time you found out." She took it, bit into it, winced at the heat, then smiled, just barely, and we sat. 2 people with too many words and just enough memory to hold on to something real. That bench still wobbled, but this time we leaned into it together. I didn't bring a key. I didn't need to. The front door had been re-keyed the week Brandon moved out, probably in one of his last grasping attempts at control. But he underestimated something critical. The deed, the contract, the clause. None of it had changed hands. The house still bore my name, and now so did the silence it carried. It was Natalie who opened the door. No words, just a long look that held too many unsaid things. Her hands were trembling slightly. She stepped aside without invitation, as if unsure whether she was welcoming her father or facing a judge. I didn't walk in with ownership. I walked in with memory. The hardwood still creaked in the exact spot near the staircase where Martha used to scold me for dragging mud in from the garage. The frame of our family portrait, long since taken down, still left a faint square on the wall. Everything had changed, but the ghosts of permanence remained. And in that moment I realized something: Brandon never lived here. He only occupied space. This house never breathed for him. It remembered who it belonged to. Natalie sat on the edge of the living room couch, posture guarded. I didn't sit. I stood near the window watching the breeze ripple the tulip leaves outside. We stayed that way for a while. 2 statues in a place that used to hold music, the smell of cinnamon, Sunday pancakes, arguments, and forgiveness. Then she said it. He came back. Yesterday. Her voice was dull. He said I owed him, that I'd humiliated him by agreeing to sign the property back. I didn't move. I let the words hang in the air until they lost their sting. Then I said, "And did you agree with him?" She looked away. "I don't know." I finally turned. My voice didn't rise. Natalie, a man who teaches you to fear his disappointment isn't a man. He's a weight. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out the manila folder from beneath a stack of magazine's divorce papers partially signed. Her hesitation was loud. I recognized it. It was the same one I'd carried years ago, standing outside the hospital room where Martha lay after her first chemo session. The hesitation of a man who knew what he had to do but feared what it would reveal about himself. I took the folder and placed it gently on the coffee table. I added a stipulation. I said, "He won't touch a cent. Not from you. Not from me." She looked up startled. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted. "You're still my daughter. You may not want that protection, but you'll have it whether you like it or not." Silence followed. But it wasn't angry. It was something older, heavier, like standing inside a childhood room you hadn't entered in decades. And then she did something unexpected. She reached into the drawer and pulled out an old object wrapped in cloth. I knew it before she unwrapped it, Martha's Bible. Worn, corners frayed, a note still tucked inside with a recipe for fig cake. My throat tightened. "She kept this next to her bed," Natalie said, "till the end. Did you know she underlined parts?" I nodded. I watched her do it for 27 years. Natalie opened it. Her voice trembled now. She wrote next to Proverbs 21. "A quiet strength breaks louder than pride." She paused. I think she was talking about you. I exhaled slowly, not out of relief, but recognition. She was talking about all of us. I finally sat down across from her. The room between us still held miles, but there was a path now, a fragile one. She pulled the second envelope out, smaller, older, handwriting that wasn't hers. It was Brandon's. "He left this before he stormed out," she said. "I haven't opened it." I took it, opened it. The letter was short, bitter, predictable. A final insult disguised as farewell. Lines like, "You'll regret throwing away a man who built your life and he'll turn you against yourself eventually." I folded it, placed it next to Martha's Bible, and said nothing. Instead, I stood up, reached into my coat pocket, and handed Natalie a set of keys. My keys. The new ones. To a house under her name now, not Brandon's, not even mine. I'd finalized the paperwork the week before. I kept the clause active but revised the beneficiary. She stared at them like they were burning her fingers. "You're giving it back to me." "No," I said. "I'm letting it go." It was never about the bricks. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But her shoulders dropped, the kind of drop that says a war inside has paused. Maybe not ended, but paused. I reached the door, then turned back. "You can change the locks again if you want." She stood slowly, walked toward me, and whispered, "No. I think I'll leave them just like this. For a while." I walked out into the sunlight. The air was warmer than I remembered, softer. I didn't look back, not because I was done, but because looking back was how this had all started. That night I slept in my bed for the first time in months at the motel still. Not a house, not a memory, just a place. And for the first time in a long time I didn't dream of loss. I didn't rehearse what I should have said in years past. I let the silence speak, and it told me something had shifted. The locks had changed, but not just the metal ones, something deeper. And once again, it wasn't revenge. It was something better, something earned. I was folding laundry in the motel room, the plain kind motel white sheets and a pair of shirts I hadn't worn in months when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go. But something, maybe the weight in my chest or the way the sunlight fell across the carpet like it used to on the kitchen floor at home, made me answer. "Dad." Her voice was hushed, almost brittle. "Can I come by?" I told her yes, but didn't ask why. I didn't need to. You can hear it in your child's voice when something inside them has changed. Not broken, not shattered, just shifted like a door quietly unlocking. 15 minutes later, she arrived. No makeup, no ring, no need to pretend. She sat on the edge of the bed like it was a church pew and looked around the room like she was ashamed. Not of me, of how far things had gone. "I found something," she said, her fingers holding a folded slip of notebook paper. It was taped under Mom's old dresser drawer. I don't know how we never saw it before. I reached for it and paused when I saw the handwriting. Martha's. Still graceful, still looping like it always was when she left me notes on the fridge. But this wasn't a recipe. It wasn't a reminder. It was dated 2 months before her last hospital visit. The words, once I started reading them, ran deeper than I expected. If you're reading this, you've likely found yourself at a crossroads. Maybe it's Natalie, maybe it's Walter, maybe it's both of you. If I've learned anything in this house, in this life, it's that silence can be both a weapon and a shield. Walter uses it as armor. Natalie uses it as a plea. I've watched the two of you miss each other in plain sight, standing in the same kitchen, breathing the same air, but talking through ghosts. If I'm gone, then I need to say this. Walter, don't just protect her. Teach her how to protect herself. And Natalie, don't wait for someone to permit you to be whole. You already are. You always were. I love you both, but more importantly, I see you. My hands trembled slightly as I folded the paper back up. There was a long pause between us before I said, "Your mother never wasted words." Natalie nodded. Her eyes were glassy, but no tears fell. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone, scrolling for something. Then she pressed play. What came next made me sit up straighter. It was a voicemail. Brandon. His voice now shrill with panic instead of pride. "You think you're clever, Natalie. You think your dad's going to keep you safe from everything. He can't protect you forever. I've got rights, you know. Half of that house was as good as mine, and if you think I'm just going to disappear, you've got another thing coming. You owe me. And I don't care if he signs papers or moves money, you'll hear from me again." She stopped the audio. "I haven't responded," she whispered. "But I'm scared." I nodded. "Good. Fear keeps us alert. But fear isn't the end. It's just the beginning of paying attention." She looked at me. "What do?" I didn't answer with advice. I answered with a folder, a copy of the updated deed, the restraining order, the affidavit from her doctor about the bruises she once claimed were from a fall, a silent arsenal built piece by piece while she was still trying to convince herself it wasn't that bad. "You already did it," I said. "You just hadn't seen it yet." She stared down at the papers as if they were written in another language. But slowly, recognition dawned. Then she asked the question I hadn't expected. Did Mom know about him? About how he talked to me? I paused, then said the only truth that mattered. She suspected. But she also believed you'd find your voice, that you'd learn when the time was right to walk away, not because we told you to, but because you realized you were worth walking toward. That broke something inside her. Not in a bad way, in a necessary way. She leaned forward, resting her head in her hands, not crying, just breathing heavier. And then she said the words that had been missing for years. "I'm sorry, Dad." I shook my head. "No. Don't apologize for being young. Don't apologize for believing love should be loud. Just promise me you won't apologize for surviving." There was a knock at the door then, too gentle to be random, too familiar to ignore. Natalie froze. Her eyes were wide. I stood, crossed the small room, opened the door. It wasn't Brandon. It was Evelyn. Our neighbor is from 3 houses down, the one who used to drop off banana bread for Martha on Sundays. She looked older now, more frail, but her smile hadn't changed. "I saw your truck," she said almost apologetically. "Didn't know you were back in town." I nodded. "Just for a while." She hesitated, then handed me a box. "I found this in our garage after Harold passed. Said it belonged to Martha. Thought you might want it. She left before I could thank her properly." I placed the box on the table. Natalie moved closer, brushing her fingers across the dusty lid before opening it. Inside, a collection of tapes, old cassettes, labeled in Martha's handwriting, recordings Natalie whispered. She used to talk into the tape recorder when she couldn't sleep. I picked one up. The label read, 2:11 a.m. Rain outside. Thinking of Walter. For a long moment we said nothing. Natalie reached for the motel's tape player, the kind most guests never touched. She slipped the cassette in. Hit play. Martha's voice. Still gentle. Still warm. I think Walter knows. Even if he doesn't say it, I think he sees what's happening. She's slipping away. But not because she's lost, because she doesn't trust the light she carries. And he blames himself. I wish they'd sit at the table and just say it out loud, that they miss each other, that they're scared. But instead he mows the lawn and she makes tea and life moves forward in this quiet ache. I turned it off, not because I couldn't bear it, but because that one line was enough. A quiet ache. Natalie looked at me, and I saw it then. Not regret, but readiness. The kind of readiness that only comes after you've been broken in the right places. She reached across the table, placed her hand over mine. "Dad," she said, "let's go home." The first time I walked into that courthouse, it was to finalize Martha's will. The second time, it was for Natalie's emergency protective order against Brandon. But the third time, that one was different. That one was for him. He filed suit under community property laws, claiming he had a right to half of what Natalie and I conspired to hide. The word he used, conspired, like I was some sort of criminal, like I hadn't spent the last 2 years paying off the roof over his head while he lounged on my back porch drinking my beer, dismissing my words and convincing my daughter that respect was optional. He was dressed too well that day, the suit too tight in the shoulders, the shoes shone like they belonged to someone honest. He smiled when he saw me as if this were some poker game and he held all the aces. But he hadn't read the table right. He didn't know we'd been playing chess while he was still bluffing at cards. Natalie sat beside me composed. No makeup, no theatrics, just the hard-won grace of a woman who had stopped apologizing for being awake. Our lawyer, Marcy, opened her folder like a surgeon preparing for a clean incision. No wasted motion. Just fact after fact laid bare like bones. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice that didn't rise or soften for theatrics, asked Brandon to speak. He stood, confident, smirking. She moved money without telling me he began. She signed documents with her father behind my back. That house we lived in, it was marital property. I contributed emotionally, physically. I cleaned the gutters. I paid for groceries. His voice faltered then, just slightly. But he caught it and pressed on. They cut me out, and I'm here to get what I deserve. The judge leaned forward. And what precisely do you believe you deserve, Mr. Wells? He hesitated. Half the property. A settlement. Compensation for the emotional distress. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Marcy. Response. Marcy didn't rise. She didn't need to. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Your Honor, the property in question was purchased by Walter Adams 10 years before the plaintiff met Natalie. The title was solely in his name. A month after the wedding, Mr. Adams gifted the deed to Natalie via a quitclaim transfer. There are notarized documents to that effect. Mr. Wells signed a postnuptial agreement 2 weeks after that, explicitly waiving any future claim on said property in exchange for use of the home rent-free for the duration of their marriage. She handed the papers over without a word. The judge scanned them. Brandon's face flushed. I don't remember signing that, he muttered. We have video, Marcy said. Calm, unbothered. Taken in your driveway. You made a toast with a can of Bud Light afterward. The judge didn't laugh. Neither did I. But Natalie exhaled just enough for me to know she'd been holding her breath. The judge continued. What about the claim of emotional distress? Marcy opened a second folder. Inside, transcripts, text logs, police reports. Your Honor, what Mr. Wells refers to as emotional distress stems from his removal from the premises after violating a no-contact order. Before that, he was warned 3 times by local authorities about verbal intimidation and coercive financial control over the defendant. Brandon tried to interrupt, but the judge raised one hand. Let her finish. Marcy did, and she did it beautifully. Each word like a pin pulled from a grenade, silent until it lands. When she was done, there was no sound in the room except the rustle of paper as the judge made her notes. Then came the twist Brandon hadn't seen coming. The defendant, Marcy continued, is requesting a protective financial injunction to prevent Mr. Wells from contacting her employer, friends, or father regarding her finances. There's precedent for this based on repeated harassment over her accounts and attempts to coerce wire transfers through guilt and emotional manipulation. Brandon's mouth dropped. He turned to Natalie. "You told them that." She didn't answer. He looked at me. "You think this makes you a good father? Huh? You think this erases all the times you weren't there? You're just doing this so she'll love you again." I stood then. Not for drama, just because I'd been sitting long enough. "I'm not doing this so she'll love me," I said, voice steady. "I'm doing this so she'll never need to settle for someone who doesn't." The courtroom didn't flinch. Neither did the judge. Her gavel came down like a soft tap, but it echoed louder than any shout. Claim denied. Protective injunction granted. Court is adjourned. And just like that, it was done. Outside the courthouse, the autumn wind cut across the steps like truth through denial. Brandon stormed past us, muttering something about appeals, about what goes around comes around. But I didn't care. That wasn't our story anymore. We weren't characters in his version of the narrative. We were writing our own. In the parking lot, Natalie looked at me. "Thank you," she whispered. I shook my head. "You don't have to thank me for standing still. You just had to come back." She nodded, then pulled out her keys. "I have something to show you." She led me to a different car, not the one Brandon used to drive. This one was hers, purchased under her name, paid in full. She opened the trunk. Inside a box. It wasn't mine. It was Martha's. "Evelyn dropped it off this morning," Natalie said softly. "Said she found it in the attic. It's yours now." I opened it. Inside were photos, letters, and a sealed envelope marked for Walter. When it's finally quiet. I didn't open it then. Not yet. Some things need silence. Others need time. And sometimes you need both. I waited 3 days before opening the envelope. Not because I was afraid of what it would say. Martha never wrote words to wound, but because I wanted to meet her on my terms. I needed the house to be still. I needed the coffee to taste like something she would have made black, 1 spoon of sugar, nothing fancy. I needed the light to hit the kitchen table the way it used to before Brandon's voice drowned everything. And when those conditions were met, I sat down, slipped my thumb beneath the seal, and opened the last thing she ever wrote to me. "Walter," it began, and already my throat tightened. No dear, no sweetheart, just my name. Solid, centered, unapologetic. She always said people put too much drama in how they start a letter and not enough truth in how they end it. Walter, I don't know when you'll read this. I hope it's not grief. I hope you are not a man still tethered to the idea that love only counts when it is loud and constant, because you and I, we were never loud, and I think that's what made us last. If you're reading this, it means something is over. Maybe it's my life. Maybe it's a chapter you finally dared to end. But either way, I want you to know I saw you, all of you, even the parts you never spoke aloud. I folded the letter halfway at that point, breathed, looked out at the backyard. The grass had grown tall again the way she hated, but somehow it looked less unruly now, just honest. I unfolded the page again. You were always too generous with silence, Walter. You gave it to me when I needed space. You gave it to Natalie when she slammed the doors. You gave it to the world when it tried to tell you who to be. But I hope you know silence is only sacred when it's chosen, not when it's forced on you by those who mistake patience for permission. I knew long before the hospital that something was shifting between Natalie and Brandon. I saw it in the way her eyes dimmed at family dinners. I saw it in how she flinched when he called her name even when he wasn't angry. I didn't say anything, and maybe that's my failure, but I know you saw it too. You always see before anyone else admits. If they ever turn on you, if our daughter forgets that your hands built her future, I want you to remember something. What you built cannot be undone by those who only know how to take. What you gave was not money, it was an anchor, and that doesn't vanish just because someone else thinks the house should be theirs. There was more. I read every line like scripture. She told me to forgive, but not forget. She said the world was going to change after she left and that I'd change too. but that I had one last purpose before I rested, to help Natalie remember herself. Not who she became in Brandon's shadow, but who she was in ours. A woman who used to climb apple trees barefoot. A girl who once told her fifth-grade teacher she wanted to be brave like her dad. I finished the letter, and I didn't cry. That surprised me. I think the grief had already passed through me in other ways during the nights I slept in my truck, during the moment I packed my bag without looking back during that courtroom where silence weighed more than testimony. This wasn't grief. This was release. 3 weeks later, Natalie called me. She had closed on her condo. Nothing flashy, but it had southern-facing windows and a little writing desk that reminded her of the one Martha used to keep. She invited me over, not for help, not for approval, just to share it. I brought the casserole dish she returned. Still warm, still full. She opened the door. Her hair was up loose, no makeup, just herself. I thought we could hang something together, she said, gesturing to a framed photo she hadn't put on the wall yet. I took it from her. It was us, me, Martha, and Natalie. Back from when we still believed we had time for everything. We didn't say much that afternoon. We didn't need to. I tightened the nail into the stud. She handed me the hammer. Our hands brushed. She didn't pull away. When I turned to leave, she stopped me. "Dad," she said, "do you want to keep the chair?" I looked at her, blinked. "What chair?" She nodded toward the garage, the one from the reading room, the one you always read the Sunday paper in. I kept it. I couldn't let him throw it out. That chair had been mine longer than most of our furniture. It wasn't fancy, but it knew me. It held the shape of my quiet, and she had saved it. I nodded. That night I sat in that chair again, back in my own house, back where things had started. The photo was hung, the letter was folded in the drawer. The war was over, and the silence. It was finally mine. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. And remember, sometimes walking away isn't surrender. It's the first step toward reclaiming your dignity.